Queen of Elphame or Elf-hame, in the folklore belief of Lowland Scotland and northern England, designates the elfin queen of Faerie, mentioned in Scottish witch trials. She is equivalent to the Queen of Faerie who rules Faerie or Fairyland. The queen, according to testimony, has a husband named Christsonday. Such a queen also appears in the legend of Thomas the Rhymer, but she is queen of a nameless world in the medieval verse romance. The name Queen of Elfland is mentioned for her only in a later ballad. Thomas the Rhymer's abduction by the queen was not just familiar folklore, but described as a kindred experience by at least one witch. The Queen of Fairies in Tamlin may be the queen of the same world, at least. She too is compelled to deliver humans as tithe to hell every 7 years. In Scottish popular tradition, the fairy queen was known as the Gia Carling, and in Evan, in one metrical legend, the fairies of Fordon Hill is where the fairy court is held, presided by Queen Mab. History of usage. The actual text spelling is Queen of Elphame, and other variants in the witch trial transcripts, and the supposition of a hame stem, leading to the etymological meaning, Elfhome, in the Scots language, is speculative on the part of Robert Pitcairn, the modern editor. The Dictionary of the Older Scottish Tongue lists only the Elphame and Elfine spellings, both defined as Fairyland. Other spellings include Queen of Elphane and Court of Elfan, Court of Elphame, Queen of Elfin. The Queen of Elphame designation was only used in isolated instances in the 19th century. Serious scholarship on Thomas the Rhymer, for instance, generally do not employ this spelling, but it was embraced by Robert Graves, who used Queen of Elphame in his works. Usage has since spread in various popular publications. The theory that the queen whom Thomas Rhymer met at Erceldune was the Saxon goddess Ursel, i.e. Horsel or Ursel, according to a German origin explanation noted in passing by Fiske, though it has received scarce notice aside from Barbara G. Walker, who cites Graves as the white goddess for this insight. Descriptions of the Queen. The Queen of Elphame was invoked, under various names, in Scottish witch trials. The forms Queen of Elphame occur in documents from the trial of Alison Pearson in 1588, and emendation to Elf-hame was suggested by the editor, Robert Pitcairn. Alison was carried off to Elphame on a number of occasions over the years, where she made good acquaintance with the Queen. But rather than the Queen herself, it was mostly with her elfin minions that Alice engaged in specific interactions, with William Simpson, Alison's cousin or uncle, being a particularly close-knitted mentor, teaching her medicinal herbs and the art of healing, which she then profited from by peddling her remedies to her patients, which included the Bishop of St. Andrews. The elfin folk from this world would arrive unexpectedly, allowing her to join in the herb-picking before sunrise, and bring the salves before her eyes. But they were often abusive, striking her in a manner that left her bereft of all her powers on her sides, rendering her bedridden for 20 weeks at a time. The form Queen of Elfin occurs in the 1598 witchcraft trial indictment and confession of Androman of Aberdeen. Androman confessed that as a boy he saw the devil, his master, in the likeness and shape of a woman, whom calloused the Queen of Elfin, and as an adult, during the span of some 32 years, he had carnal relations with the Queen of Elfin, on whom he begat many bairns. Further down, however, the devil, whom he calls Christsonday, is the goodman, though the Queen has grip of all the craft. Androman further confessed that on the Holy Rood Day the Queen of Elfin and her company rode white horses alongside the devil, who appeared out of snow in the form of a stag. She and her companions had human shapes, yet were as shadows, and that they were playing and dancing whenever they pleased. Bessie Dunlop in 1576 confessed that the dead man's spirit she had congress with was one of the good neighbours of Brownies, who dwelt at the court of Faerie, and they had come to take her away, but she refused to comply, thereby angering Tom. When interrogated, Bessie denied having carnal relations with Tom, though he once took her by the apron and walled Haif had her gangoned with him to Elphame. Bessie was informed that the Queen had secretly visited her before, and according to Tom, when Bessie lay in bed in childbirth, it was the Queen of Elfhame who, in the guise of a stout woman, had offered her a drink and prophesied her child's death and her husband's cure. And indeed, it was at the behest of this Queen, who was his master, that Tom had come to Bessie at all. The Queen's shape-shifting magic extends to her own person. Androman's confession also noted that she can be old or young as she pleases. Marion Grant, of the same coven as Androman, witnessed the Queen as a fine woman clad in a white wallico. Similarly, Isabel Gaudy's confession described the Queen of Faerie as handsomely clothed in white linen and in white and brown clothes, and that providing more food than Isabel could eat. Queen of Elfland in Ballads. The traditional ballads do not call her the Queen of Elfhame as such. In ballad version of Thomas the Rhymer names as Queen of Elfland the being whose spirits Thomas away, and the two queens may be equivalent according to common belief. For instance, Androman's accuses charged that he had learned his art of healing from his Queen of Elfin, and plied his trade in return for might diet. Just like Thomas the Rhymer, they also extracted from him the affirmation that he has known dead men like Thomas the Rhymer and the king who died in Flodoun, who were in the Queen's company. Furthermore, the Romance version of the legend of Thomas the Rhymer speaks of the feet to hell, synonymous with the tendings into hell, in the Greenwood variant ballad, while the aforementioned accused witch, the poor Alison Pearson, who lost her life in 1586 for believing these things, testified that the tribute was annual. In both the ballad and romance forms of the legend of Thomas the Rhymer, the supernatural queen initially mistaken for the Queen of Heaven by the protagonist, but she identifies herself as Queen of Elfland, or the Queen of some supernatural realm that remains nameless. The Nameless Land romance is the same as the Elfland of ballad insofar as the Queen is able to show Thomas three paths, one leading to her homeland and the other two to heaven and hell, and J.A.H. Murray says it is a place which would be called Faerie or Fairyland in tales from later periods. But, in Tamlin, the equivalent character, Queen o' Fairies, is a more sinister figure. She captures mortal men, and entertains them in her subterranean home, but then uses them to pay attend to hell. Semple Ballad. Robert Semple, in a ballad on the Bishop Patrick Adamson, refers to Alison Pearson participating in the Faerie rite. The Dictionary of the Older Scottish Tongue also, in giving the entry Elfine, Fairyland, and gives Semple's ballad as an example in usage. For OGHT the Kirksuld him forbid, he sped him sown, and gat the thrid, ein carling of the Queen of Faerie, that I will win Gaia to Elfine Carais, through all Breda Baines cohes bene, on horseback on Hallow Ewan, and die in Psyching Satane Nightus, as Cosea with Sur Siliwichtus. R.S. Legend of the Bishop of St. Androy Life, Calad Mr. Patrick Adamson alias Custine, Poems 16th cent. In Scottish Poems of the 16th Century, p. 320–321 Robert Jameson also noted the ballad under the etymological explanation of Seelie meaning happy. The ballad thus mentioned the Queen of Fairies, Elfine meaning Elfland, and Seelie witches in a single passage.